Robert was 63 years old when he first sat across from me. He had been doing everything right, or so he believed. He exercised 3 times a week. He had cut out processed food. He was eating more fruit, more whole foods, genuinely trying to take his health seriously after a wake-up call in his early 60s that had scared him into changing his habits. And yet his testosterone had dropped another 30 points since his last panel 6 months prior. His erectile function was worsening despite the lifestyle changes. His urologist before me had suggested they discuss medication. Robert was frustrated in the way that only a man who is genuinely trying and still losing ground can be frustrated. He looked at me and said, "I am doing everything I was told to do. Why is this still getting worse?" I asked him to walk me through a typical day of eating. And about 4 minutes into that conversation, he mentioned that every single morning, as part of his new healthy routine, he ate half a grapefruit with breakfast, had been doing it for 8 months, every day, without fail, because he had read it was good for weight management and heart health. I want to tell you what I told Robert next, because it is the same thing I wish someone had told him 8 months earlier, before 8 months of daily grapefruit had been quietly dismantling the hormonal environment he was working so hard to rebuild. I'm Dr. Emily Carter, a board-certified urologist with over 12 years of experience helping men over 60 protect their testosterone, their sexual function, and their long-term vitality from threats they never saw coming. I want to challenge something you may have been told, that eating more fruit is always a step in the right direction for men's health, and that natural foods carry no meaningful risk to your hormonal system. In my clinical experience and in the research I follow closely, that belief is far more negotiable than most men realize. One fruit in particular, one that is widely marketed as a health food, that appears on virtually every clean eating list ever written, has specific, documented, and serious implications for male hormonal health after 60 that almost no one in mainstream health media has bothered to explain to the men who need to hear it most. Before we go any further, do me a favor right now. Drop a comment below and tell me one healthy habit you've adopted in the last year that you're genuinely not sure is working the way you expected. Because sometimes the thing that looks most like progress is the thing most worth examining. Subscribe if you haven't already. This channel exists for the man who wants real information, not reassurance. Let me tell you what grapefruit actually does inside the body of a man over 60, because the mechanism here is not vague or speculative. It is one of the most well-documented drug-nutrient interactions in all of clinical pharmacology, and its implications for male hormonal health extend far beyond the medication interactions most people have dimly heard about. Grapefruit, and to a lesser extent its close relatives pomelo and Seville orange, contains a class of compounds called furanocoumarins, the most clinically significant of which are bergamottin and 6,7-dihydroxybergamottin. These compounds are potent inhibitors of an enzyme called CYP3A4, which is one of the primary enzymes in the cytochrome P450 family, responsible for metabolizing a vast range of substances in the liver and the intestinal wall. When you consume grapefruit, you do not transiently inhibit CYP3A4 the way a medication might for a few hours. You irreversibly inhibit the enzyme molecules themselves. The effect persists for 24 to 72 hours after a single serving, meaning that eating grapefruit once a day, as Robert was doing, creates a state of near-continuous CYP3A4 suppression in the body. Now here is where this becomes directly relevant to testosterone and male sexual health, and I want to take this step by step because I need you to understand both dimensions of the problem. The first dimension is pharmaceutical. CYP3A4 is the primary metabolic pathway for a significant number of medications that men over 60 are commonly prescribed. Statins, atorvastatin, simvastatin, lovastatin, are metabolized through CYP3A4. When grapefruit inhibits this enzyme, statin blood levels can rise to 2, 3, even 10 times their intended concentration, depending on the drug and the dose. This is not a theoretical concern. It is documented in the pharmacological literature and carries real risk of muscle damage, liver stress, and in severe cases, rhabdomyolysis. Calcium channel blockers used for blood pressure. Amlodipine, felodipine, nifedipine are similarly affected. Several anti-anxiety medications, certain immunosuppressants, some PDE5 inhibitors, the class of medication that includes drugs used for erectile dysfunction, are also metabolized through this pathway, meaning that grapefruit consumption can unpredictably amplify their effects and side effect profiles. If you are over 60 and on any regular prescription medication, there is a meaningful probability that grapefruit is silently altering how that medication behaves in your body. And there is an equally meaningful probability that no one told you, because medication-grapefruit interaction counseling is one of the most consistently underprovided pieces of patient education in primary care. But the pharmaceutical dimension, significant as it is actually not the reason I am most concerned about grapefruit for men over 60 from a hormonal standpoint. The second dimension is what matters most for this conversation. CYP3A4 is not only responsible for metabolizing medications, it is a key enzyme in the metabolism of steroid hormones, including estrogen. When CYP3A4 is chronically inhibited by daily grapefruit consumption, estrogen clearance is impaired. Estrogen accumulates. And for a man over 60 who is already navigating the natural hormonal shift of aging, declining testosterone, rising estrogen to testosterone ratio, increasing aromatase activity in the visceral fat that tends to accumulate in this decade, adding a daily estrogen clearance inhibitor to his diet is the equivalent of pouring accelerant on a fire he is already trying to put out. The research here is direct. A study published in the journal Nutrition and Cancer, using data from over 50,000 participants, found that postmenopausal women who consumed grapefruit regularly had significantly higher circulating estrogen levels than those who did not, with the proposed mechanism being exactly the CYP3A4 mediated impairment of estrogen metabolism I've described. While that study focused on women, the enzymatic mechanism is sex-independent. The same CYP3A4 pathway governs estrogen clearance in men. A man who is eating grapefruit daily is, with reasonable mechanistic certainty, impairing his own estrogen metabolism. And in the context of a male body over 60 that is already trending toward relative estrogen dominance, this matters enormously. What does relative estrogen dominance look like in a man over 60? It looks like the symptom cluster that I see constantly in my practice and that gets attributed again and again to just aging. Fatigue that doesn't resolve with sleep. Reduced libido. Not absent, but flat, unresponsive, difficult to engage. Erectile dysfunction that is inconsistent and confusing. Sometimes functional, sometimes not, without obvious pattern. Emotional flatness, mild but persistent low mood. Increased abdominal fat deposition despite reasonable diet. Reduced morning erections. Gynecomastia in some cases, the development of breast tissue that men find deeply distressing and are often too embarrassed to raise with their doctor. These are the downstream consequences of an estrogen to testosterone ratio that has tipped in the wrong direction. And one of the contributors to that tipping, in a subset of men who are eating grapefruit daily in the name of health, is sitting on their breakfast plate every morning. Let me return to Robert for a moment, because his story did not end with the diagnosis. It ended, or rather began again, with a change. I asked Robert to eliminate grapefruit completely from his diet for 60 days. Nothing else changed in his protocol. Same exercise routine, same dietary structure, same supplements. 60 days later, his testosterone had risen by 41 points. His estradiol, his primary estrogen marker, had dropped by 9 points. His erectile function scores, measured on a validated clinical questionnaire, improved meaningfully. He came back into my office looking like a different man, not because grapefruit was the only factor in his hormonal decline, but because removing it removed an invisible ceiling that had been preventing his other efforts from gaining traction. His body had more capacity to recover than the previous 8 months had suggested. It simply needed one specific obstruction removed. I want to talk about a third dimension of grapefruit's impact that is less frequently discussed but clinically relevant: its effect on cortisol metabolism. CYP3A4 is also involved in the breakdown of cortisol. When this enzyme is inhibited, cortisol clearance slows. Cortisol accumulates at higher levels than it otherwise would. And as I discussed in a previous video on this channel, elevated cortisol directly suppresses testosterone through the pregnenolone-steal mechanism. Your body preferentially converts hormonal precursors to cortisol under chronic stress signals, at the expense of testosterone production. Grapefruit-mediated CYP3A4 inhibition may therefore compound hormonal disruption through two simultaneous mechanisms: impairing estrogen clearance and elevating cortisol, both of which suppress testosterone, from opposite ends of the hormonal cascade. This is the piece that I find most clinically significant and most under-discussed. We are not talking about a fruit that is mildly suboptimal. We are talking about a fruit that, through a single enzymatic mechanism, may be simultaneously raising estrogen, raising cortisol, and suppressing testosterone in the very men who are eating it as part of a sincere effort to improve their health. And because the effect accumulates over weeks and months rather than appearing acutely, it is nearly invisible without careful clinical investigation. Now I want to address the question you are probably formulating right now. What about the other health benefits of grapefruit? The vitamin C, the antioxidants, the fiber, the reported benefits for weight management and cardiovascular health. I want to be honest with you. Grapefruit does contain beneficial nutrients. The case against it for men over 60 is not that it is nutritionally empty. The case is that its specific pharmacological effect on CYP3A4, an effect that is unique to grapefruit and a small number of related citrus fruits among all fruits and vegetables, creates a risk-benefit calculation that, for men in this demographic managing declining testosterone and common prescription medications, tilts clearly toward removal. Every beneficial nutrient in grapefruit is available in other fruits that carry none of these risks. Oranges, berries, kiwi, papaya, pomegranate, which has its own genuinely impressive evidence base in male sexual health. Apples, pears. There is no nutritional justification for accepting the specific hormonal and pharmacological risks of grapefruit when the same nutritional value is readily available elsewhere. Let me also address the portion and frequency question directly, because I know some of you are thinking, what if I just eat it occasionally? The half-life of furanocoumarins and their CYP3A4 inhibition is long enough that even 2 to 3 servings per week creates meaningful cumulative enzyme suppression. The clinical recommendation for men over 60 on any statin, calcium channel blocker, or hormonal support protocol is typically complete elimination rather than moderation. For men not on these medications, the hormonal rationale I've described still supports significant reduction, if not elimination, particularly given that the recovery of CYP3A4 function after stopping grapefruit consumption is well documented and typically begins within 48 to 72 hours of the last serving. The body corrects quickly. The benefit of removal arrives faster than most men expect. Here is your practical action plan. First, and most immediately, check every medication you are currently taking against the FDA's published list of grapefruit interacting drugs. I will describe it clearly so you can find it. Search FDA grapefruit drug interactions, and you will find an official consumer guide. If any of your medications appear on that list, eliminating grapefruit is not a preference. It is a clinical necessity that your prescribing physician should have already communicated to you. Second, replace grapefruit in your diet with pomegranate, either the fruit or 100% juice in small quantities, which has genuine peer-reviewed evidence supporting improvements in testosterone levels, nitric oxide production, and erectile function in men. One study found that daily pomegranate juice consumption was associated with a 24% average increase in salivary testosterone after 2 weeks. That is the direction you want to be moving. Third, if you have been consuming grapefruit regularly for months and have been experiencing unexplained hormonal symptoms, flat libido, fatigue, worsening erectile function, rising estradiol on blood work, Ask your doctor to recheck your hormone panel after 60 days of complete grapefruit elimination before pursuing any pharmaceutical intervention. You may be surprised by what the numbers show when the enzymatic obstruction is removed. Fourth, and I want to be clear about this, if you are on a statin, have this conversation with your prescribing physician specifically. Some statins are metabolized heavily through CYP3A4, simvastatin and lovastatin in particular, and others like pravastatin and rosuvastatin are not. If you are on a high-risk statin and have been eating grapefruit, your doctor needs to know. This is a patient safety issue, not just a wellness preference. Gentlemen, I want to close with the broader principle that Robert's story illustrates, because I think it matters beyond grapefruit specifically. The pursuit of health after 60 requires more than good intentions and generally positive habits. It requires precision. It requires understanding not just what is broadly healthy, but what is specifically appropriate for a male body in the 6th and 7th decade of life. A body with a different hormonal architecture, a different metabolic profile, and often a different pharmacological context than the generic healthy eating advice was written for. The information I've shared today is not designed to make you afraid of fruit. It is designed to give you one more piece of genuine, mechanistically grounded knowledge that allows you to make your health efforts more effective and more targeted. Your body has more capacity to restore hormonal balance than you may currently believe. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply identify and remove what has been obstructing that restoration, quietly, invisibly, from the breakfast table. Share this video with a man you know who is eating clean, working hard, doing everything right, and still not seeing the results he expects, because sometimes the obstruction is hiding in the most innocent-looking place. I'm Dr. Emily Carter. The connection between grapefruit, CYP3A4, estrogen metabolism, and testosterone that I walked you through today is documented, mechanistically sound, and almost never communicated to the men who most need to hear it. And the men who act on it are consistently the ones who discover just how much their bodies were capable of all along. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.